Good morning. Welcome to the State Water Control Board. I'm going to call it our summer meeting since it's so blazing hot outside. And at this time, as I call the meeting to order, we're going to look at the agenda. So I'm going to need an approval of the agenda, please, as it stands.
Move approval.
Green button.
Second.
Okay, we do have a motion and a second, whether you could hear that or not. We're working on our microphone issues. Okay, so as we move through the minutes, and everyone has looked at the minutes, you've had time to look at that in your agenda already. Do you hear a motion for approval?
Madam Chairman, I move we approve the minutes of the March 27, 2025 meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Dunn. I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. And all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. I apologize. Did we get a motion? Did I get an approval from the board on the agenda? Yes. Okay. I wanted to make sure I did. Okay. Thank you. Just wanted to make sure that was on the record because I didn't hear you guys down there. Okay, before we have tab B for the revisions to the Virginia Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, I think we have a disclosure by Mr. Yob.
Thank you, and good morning, Madam Chair. I have submitted to the DEQ staff a signed transactional disclosure statement pursuant to Virginia State and Local Government Conflict of Interests Act before participating in or voting on the agenda items identified in our tabs as C, F, G, H, and I. I do have a personal interest in these transactions as my employment with the County of Henrico as a Deputy County Manager for Community Operations has many of these permits or other actions in those areas. So Henrico County, like other Virginia localities, is subject to Virginia Water Quality Management, planning regulations, and the Virginia Water Protection General Permits. However, Madam Chair, I feel I am able to participate in agenda items C, F, G, H, and I fairly, objectively, and in the public interests.
Thank you, Mr. Yob. And at this time, we're going to move on into the final exemption regulations presented by Mr. Zahadra, please.
Good morning, Madam Chair, ladies and gentlemen of the board. My name is Neil Zarodka. I manage DEQ's Office of Land Application Programs. And this morning I have for your consideration a final exempt regulatory change related to exemptions for biosolids permits that would affect the VIPD's permit regulation, 9 VAC 2531, as well as the VPA regulation, 9 VAC 2532. So this change comes about as a result of House Bill 2517 from this most recent Acts of Assembly, and it exempts institutions of public higher education from the need to obtain a biosolids land application permit if they are land applying biosolids for research on their own property. And it does require specific landowner notification, adherence to setbacks, as well as record keeping. There is a sunset provision on this that the exemption would expire in 2030. So right now, currently, biosolids land application permits are required of anyone who's land applying biosolids in Virginia. And those permits contain provisions for the quality of the biosolids, rates and timing of application, notifications to various entities, site restrictions, including setbacks, monitoring and reporting requirements. And I'll note that from the time that DEQ got the program in 2008, biosolids research has been exempt from permitting fees and land application fees, but they still had to get a permit. So today's action would exempt those research institutions from the requirement to obtain that biosolids land application permit under the conditions specified. And it does require that notice to landowners 30 days before, as well as setbacks and record keeping. And this action will enable Virginia to meet the state legislative requirements. So the adoption process is exempt from the standard regulatory process outlined in the Administrative Process Act, and this is necessary to conform to state law. So does the board have any questions before I move on to staff recommendation?
Any questions? Staff recommendation, please.
Staff recommends that the board adopt the proposal with an effective date consistent with the Administrative Process Act. And in adopting this proposal, the board affirms that it will receive, consider, and respond to petitions by any person at any time with respect to reconsideration or revision as approved in Section 2.2-4006B of the Administrative Process Act.
Thank you. Board, I have a recommendation from staff. What's your pleasure?
Madam Chairman, I move we adopt staff recommendation as presented.
I have a motion. I need a second.
Second.
I have a second. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion.
Thank you.
And I apologize. I am the worst on this microphone, so please forgive me. And I need to do a little housekeeping that I have been reminded by staff that I did not do, so please forgive me. And here we go. These are the rules for the meeting of the State Water Control Board for today. Attendees may not erect any signage inside or outside the meeting room or the building. Attendees are not entitled to be disorderly or disrupt the meeting from proceeding in an orderly, efficient, effective fashion. Disruptive behavior may result in a recess or removal from the meeting. Possession or use of any device that may disrupt the conduct of the business is prohibited, including but not limited to voice amplification equipment, bullhorns, blowhorns, sirens, or other noise-producing devices, as well as signs on sticks, poles, or stakes, or helium-filled balloons. All attendees are asked to be respectful of all speakers. Rules will be enforced fairly and impartially, not only to ensure the efficient and effective conduct of business, but also to ensure no interference in the business of this complex, its employees, and its guests. Attendees wishing to record the proceedings are welcome to do so. However, you may not interfere with the business of the meeting, nor impede the view or participation of other meeting attendees and staff. No smoking is allowed unless in a designated area outside. This includes tobacco and e-cigarettes. No alcohol, fireworks, pyrotechnics, weapons, or any substances, items controlled by law are allowed. No firearms are allowed in the state's contracted spaces, except for firearms carried by our law enforcement officers or authorized personal security. All violators may be subject to removal from the meeting facility, and anyone removed from the facility may not re-enter. Anyone who fails to comply with removal may be charged with trespass. Thank you all for listening intently. And also what I did not do was I did not introduce or allow this board to be introduced, and I apologize for that. And we have Mr. Cameron joining us. So I'm going to start down to my left for introductions, please.
Tommy Brennan, Henrico County.
Jerry Kilgore, Henrico County. Scott Cameron, Fairfax County.
Robert Dunn, Chester, Virginia.
Steve Yao, Henrico County.
Ross Phillips, Office of the Attorney General.
And Lou Wallace, far southwest Virginia, Russell County. Thank you all. I apologize again for that, staff. Please forgive me. I'll try to do better.
Madam Chair,
Yes, sir.
before we jump fully into the agenda, may I make one announcement, if I
Yes,
may?
sir.
Thank you. It's my honor and pleasure to introduce Orsenco, which is a group called Ohio River Valley Water Sanitation Commission. Myself and Lou are represent the state of Virginia. It's a 7-state commission. And since 1988, there hasn't been a single Virginian on the leadership board. So I'd like to everybody recognize Lou was just nominated as Secretary or Treasurer.
Thank you. thank you. That's very nice. I wasn't expecting that.
Sorry to interrupt.
As chair, I'll forgive you that one. All right, on a more serious note, forgive us, please. We're going to move on to tab C, which Mr. Williams will present, Water Quality Management Planning Regulation, non-VAC 25-720, an amendment to add 7 new TMDL waste load allocations in the James River Basin and the Big Tennessee, by the way. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board. I'm Justin Williams. I manage the Office of Watershed Programs at DEQ's central office. Today, I'll present waste load allocations in the Water Quality Management and Planning Regulations resulting from 2 TMDL studies, which were necessary pursuant to state and federal mandates. Specifically, I will discuss and cover the applicable river basins for the amendments, the laws requiring TMDLs to address water body impairments, a brief overview of the water quality improvement and TMDL process, and the specific waste load allocations for the board's consideration, which will include additional background on one of the waste load allocations resulting polychlorinated biphenyls, or PCBs as they're commonly known. The particular action before the board today covers 2 separate river basins, as the water quality management and planning regulations are separated into basins in the regulations. These regulations are necessary pursuant to state and federal mandates to address water bodies that are impaired within the Commonwealth. Today, the board will be asked to adopt 4 new PCB TMDL waste load allocations into the James River Basin, specifically 9 VAC 25-720-60, as well as 2 new sediment and 1 new phosphorus waste load allocation into the Tennessee Big Sandy Basin and 9 VAC 25-720, 25 VAC 720-90. Overall, these TMDLs and waste load allocations are part of the water quality improvement process. As the board is aware, through our sampling and monitoring program, water bodies are identified as impaired and included upon a biannual listing in the 303 impaired water bodies. Pursuant to state and federal mandates, we are required to address those impaired water bodies, which we do through these TMDL studies, or also known as cleanup studies, which include waste load allocations and load allocations to address sources and improve water quality for the water body. The waste load allocations that the board adopt and that are a part of this process are then ultimately included in permitting or addressed as a part of an implementation plan, which is supported by 319 funding to implement best management practices. The waste load allocations specifically presented for the board are part of the overall TMDL process, which includes looking at existing loads from pollutant sources and identifying the necessary amount in order for the water body to achieve water quality, or the TMDL endpoint. That overall amount includes the waste load allocation, which is adopted by the board, the load allocation, which again is addressed through implementation planning and 319 funding for best management practices, and does include a margin of safety to ensure that the water quality achievement does occur. Specifically, again, the board is being asked to adopt or consider polychlorinated biphenyls, or PCB TMDLs. Unlike other TMDLs, PCB TMDLs are addressed entirely or largely from historical activities. There's still an estimated amount of large legacy contaminant PCBs throughout the Commonwealth and the United States, and is considered very stable, heat-resistant, and persistent in the environment, and commonly resulted from transformers, circuit breakers, PCV products, caulking materials, and paints, or essentially those that needed flame suppression. They continue to be an issue because PCBs, being stable, are bioaccumulate and present both the potential human health concern as well as ecological, especially because they bioaccumulate at low concentrations and then are magnified through the chain. Virginia Department of Health targets specific fish tissue species and identifies water bodies in which to place a fish advisory. The specific PCBs for consideration were identified through the TMDL process as the Middle and Upper James, but as I'll note for the board in the actual recommendation, and as you saw in other materials, to provide better clarity to permittees, particularly in the future, we have added specific nomenclature to identify and break for the James River portion, the non-tidal James above Bent Creek and non-tidal James below Bent Creek. This helps to provide specific additional clarity to those who will have to implement the waste load allocation. Included as well are allocations for the Maury and Jackson River. The James River portion covers or mirrors essentially what is commonly known as the Upper and Middle James Basin. and covers localities from the western portion along the James watershed into the city of Richmond. The other waste load allocation for consideration is the Tennessee Big Sandy River Basin, which by virtue of identification of sources covers about 6 miles, and the water quality impairment, which was identified for benthic or aquatic life, identified the most probable stressor or cause as being too much sediment or too much phosphorus. As a result of the study, waste load allocations for sediment for the Greendale Creek and the to Flanter Branch, are included for both phosphorus and sediment. All of the TMDL process involves the public from the beginning to the end, including a notification of kickoff of TMDL, technical advisory or engagement meetings, as well as final comment before it's brought to the board. For the James River, there was a series of technical advisory committees as well as public meetings, and comments were received on the final draft of the TMDL, which were addressed. For the board's action today, no comments were received. For the Greendale TMDL, again, there were public meetings, public engagement meetings, which were attended by stakeholders. There were no comments received on the TMDL study or for the board action presented today. As a reminder, the total maximum daily load studies and waste load allocations that are adopted by the board do have an Administrative Process Act exemption, and it is exempt from the overall requirements of the APA pursuant to Section 2.2, 4006A14 of the Virginia Code. But as noted, we do include and continue to include stakeholders and have public comment as a part of that process. So with that, I'll pause for any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Williams? You may proceed.
So the staff recommendation for the board is to amend the water quality management planning regulations to include the TMDL waste load allocations as shown as attachment 2 of the board book with the following modification. In the table for the TMDL identified for 194, the stream name will instead read as non-tidal James above Bent Creek. And for TMDL numbered 195, the stream name will be identified as the non-tidal James below Bent Creek. And therefore, in addition, the recommendation is to include those allocations as modified with the stream name and the board book material and attachment 2, and affirm that the board will receive, consider, and respond to any petitions by any interested person at any time with respect to reconsideration or revision.
Thank you. Board, you've heard the recommendation of staff. What is your pleasure?
Madam Chair, I move that we adopt the regulation as recommended by staff.
I second.
Thank you, Mr. Young. Thank you, Mr. Cameron. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion before the board? Hearing none, I'll call for the motion. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? We have none of those. Thank you very much, Mr. Williams. Next, we're going to hear from, on final regulations, the reissuance of Virginia Pollutant Discharge Elimination System General Permit Regulation for domestic sewage discharges of less than or equal to 1,000 gallons per day. Mr. Sherman, thank you very much.
Madam Chair, members of the board, good morning. I'm Peter Sherman with the Office of VIPTES Permits. I'm presenting for final approval amendment to the VIPTES General Permit Regulation for domestic sewage discharges of less than or equal to 1,000 gallons per day, 9 VAC 25-110. Our process to date has included publishing a notice of intended regulatory action, holding 2 TAC meetings, and sharing the revised regulation fact sheet with US EPA Region 3 during 2024. This board authorized a public comment period and public hearing on December 4th, 2024. The public comment period ran from February 10th to April 11th of this year. 1 public comment was received. The public hearing was held March 13th of this year. No members of the public attended and no comments were received. The 1 public comment asked who monitors on-site sewer mounds in the Suffolk and Chesapeake area. The commenter expressed concern that there's no stormwater drainage system in place and the area is affected by sea level rise and a high water table. In DEQ's response, which is documented in our TH09 document, we indicated that The domestic sewage discharge general permit does not apply to on-site sewer mounds because they are not alternative discharging treatment works that are covered under this general permit. Rather, such sewer mounds release effluent into the soil, and they are not point sources. As a result, this comment is not applicable to this permit. DEQ further indicated that in Virginia, elevated sand mounds are regulated by the Virginia Department of Health under 12 VAC 5-610-960. With regard to EPA review, DEQ received EPA Region 3 comments on the revised permit and fact sheet on January 16th, 2025. DEQ provided initial responses back to EPA on February 13th. EPA provided feedback, and DEQ provided a follow-up submittal to EPA Region 3 on March 25th, 2025. On March 25th, the EPA responded back that they had no further comment on the permit. Several EPA comments resulted in revisions to portions of the fact sheet for this permit. For example, we added a new discussion of the final decision process for the permit based on EPA's suggestion. With regard to comments, EPA comments on the permit itself, EPA's first comment recommended explaining or defining how to estimate flow, since in this permit, the sample type for flow is designated as an estimate. In our response, we explained that since flow can be estimated using various methods, such as use of a flow meter or per resident assumptions, the permit does not specify a particular approach, thereby allowing flexibility for the permittee or operator to choose the most appropriate method. No change to the permit has been made in response to this comment. EPA's second comment recommended clarifying how compliance with the 85% removal requirement for BOD5 and TSS will be verified. In response, we re-examined the 85% removal provision and determined that it is appropriate to remove this provision from the permit, since it is a secondary treatment requirement that is applicable to publicly owned treatment works, and this general permit does not cover publicly owned treatment works. EPA's third comment addressed automatic transfer of permit coverage. EPA recommended requiring 30-day notice in advance of the proposed transfer date. The current language requires notice within 30 days of the transfer of the facility or property title. In our response, we explained that given the large number of single-family homes covered by this permit and the fact that real estate transactions are typically agreed upon only days before transfer, requiring 30 days notice in advance is burdensome on the permittee and contrary to the industry standard process. It is also problematic for DEQ because if the 30-day transfer timeline is not met, there is no regulatory alternative to change ownership for this general permit except to terminate the original permit and issue new coverage. No change has been made to the permit in response to this comment. As noted on March 25th, 2025, following communication of DEQ's positions, EPA indicated they had no further comment on this permit. To summarize significant updates since proposal, we have removed the requirement for the 85% removal of BOD5 and TSS in each of the effluent limitation sections where it appeared. That's 1A3, 1B3, and 1C3. Again, the basis is that requirement, 85% removal requirement, applies to publicly owned treatment works, and those facilities are not regulated under this general permit. I would note that that change does not affect the limits on BOD5 and TSS in sections A1, B1, and C1 of the permit. Those numeric limits remain unchanged. Our second change of the permit, we've clarified that the non-compliance reporting can be an oral or an online report, and the basis for this change was to achieve consistency with recently expanded online reporting capabilities. Do any members of the board have questions?
Any questions? Hearing none, you may proceed.
Staff recommends that the board adopt the amendments to the general permit regulation for domestic sewage discharges of less than or equal to 1,000 gallons per day. Staff also recommends that the board affirm that it will receive, consider, and respond to petitions by any person anytime with respect to reconsideration of this regulation as provided by the Administrative Process Act.
Thank you. You've heard board, you've heard the staff recommendation. What is your pleasure?
Madam Chair, I move that we adopt the staff recommendations.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion from the board? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, sir. Next on the agenda, we have the reissuance of Virginia Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, VPDES, general permit for seafood processing facilities. Ms. Duncan, thank you very much. Tab E, Board.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board. My name is, oh wait. There we go. My name is Erica Duncan, manager of the Office of VIPD's Permits and Compliance. I'm presenting on behalf of Azra Belalgic. We're considering the VIPD's general permit regulation for seafood processing facilities, 9 VAC 25-115, which expires on June 30th, 2026. We're at the final stage of our normal reissuance process, and we'll be asking the board to adopt the final amendments. As a reminder, this GP regulation governs the discharge of wastewater from seafood processing facilities and stormwater associated with industrial activity from seafood processing facilities classified as SIC codes 2091, canned and cured fish and seafoods, and 2092, prepared fish or frozen fish and seafoods. This permit currently covers 42 facilities in the state. Our regulatory process to date has included publishing a notice of intended regulatory action on April 8th, 2024. No comments were received. One technical advisory committee meeting was held October 3rd, 2024. The regulation and fact sheet were provided to EPA Region 3 on October 16th, 2024. The board authorized the notice of public comment and public hearing at the end of December 4th, 2024 board meeting. We held a public comment period from February 10th through April 11th of this year, and no comments were received. The public hearing was held on March 13th of this year. No members of the public attended the public hearing. EPA review. Draft documents were shared with EPA on October 16th, 2024. Initial comments were received January 13th, 2025. DEQ provided initial responses February 13th, 2025. EPA provided feedback and DEQ followed up with responses on March 25th, 2025. Final resolution and acceptance by EPA was received on March 25th, 2025. DEQ responses to EPA comments on or affecting the permit are presented in the next 4 slides. The majority of EPA's comments resulted in editorial changes and/or information in the fact sheet. EPA provided the following comments on the general permit regulation. The first comment is for permit automatic transfer, recommended requiring at least 30 days in advance of the proposed transfer date. DEQ response is transfer of permit coverage language at 9 VAC 25-115-50 Part 3.y.2 was amended for consistency with the VIPD's regulation 9 VAC 25-31-380 transfer of permits and 40 CFR 122.61B1. Comment number 2, recommended that the permit include indicator monitoring requirements for SIC codes 2091 and 2092, consistent with EPA's 2021 MSGP Sector U. DEQ's response was DEQ does not intend on implementing indicator monitoring in this general permit. No change was made to the proposed regulation. EPA comment number 3, clarify the inclusion of firefighting training activities as an allowable non-stormwater discharge. DEQ recognizes that these activities may not apply directly to the industrial activity covered by this permit. However, this language was included to align with our stormwater language with the 2024 Industrial Stormwater General Permit Regulation. No change was made to the proposed regulation. EPA comment number 4, recommended explaining or defining in the permit how to estimate flow. Since effluent flows can be estimated using various methods, the permit does not specify a particular approach, which allows flexibility for the permittee to choose the most appropriate method based on available data and the configuration of their outfall. No change was made to this proposed regulation. EPA comment number 5 asked DEQ to clarify the application of federal effluent guidelines for existing and new sources of scallop processing and hand-shucked oyster processing. DEQ's response: the more stringent new source limits were applied to both new and existing sources since 1997 and have been carried forward with each reissuance of the general permit regulation. Permittees have consistently demonstrated the ability to meet these limits. No change was made to this proposed regulation. Comment number 6 recommended changing language such as frequently and as feasible to more specific language to support permittee compliance. The current language, DEQ response, the current language is included to address variations in facility operations to allow for flexibility in the operation within this industry. No change was made to the proposed regulation. Thank you. EPA asked DEQ to clarify if all permits are required to prepare a SWIP. DEQ's response: only facilities classified under SIC codes 2091 and 2092 are required to comply with stormwater management requirements, which include development of a SWIP. No change has been made to the proposed regulation. A final resolution and acceptance by the EPA was received on March 25th, 2025. Significant changes since the proposed stage. Section 50 of the general permit. Language was updated to state that coverage under this permit may be automatically transferred to a new permittee if the current permittee notifies the department at least 30 days in advance of the proposed transfer. Language has been revised for consistency with the VIPDs regulation, which is 9 VAC 25-31-380, transfer of permits, and 40 CFR 122.61B1. Also clarified that 24-hour compliance reporting can be an online or an oral report, Part 3-1. Please note, Melissa's handing out an errata sheet for this final action that addresses the revision Part 2 of the general permit. Are there any questions?
Any questions for Ms. Duncan?
Yeah, I didn't catch. How many plants are there in the state?
42.
42, and most of them are located where?
Hampton Roads and Eastern Shore, so southeast of here.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions?
Hearing none, you may proceed.
Staff recommends that the board adopt the amendments to the VIPD's general permit for seafood processing facilities, 9 VAC 25-115, including the edits on the errata sheet distributed at today's meeting. Staff also recommends the board affirm that it will receive, consider, and respond to petitions by any person at any time with respect to reconsideration or revision of this regulation as provided by the Administrative Process Act.
Thank you. You've heard staff recommendation. Do I have a motion?
Madam Chairman, I move we approve the staff recommendation.
I second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion from this board? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Good to go. Thank you so much. At this time, we're also going to move on to proposed regulations, the reissuance of Virginia Water Protection General Permit regulations. And this is going to be Virginia Water Protection General Permit for impacts less than 1/2 acre. That's in your tab F. Ms. Nguyen. And you're going to be presenting tab G also, right?
F, G, and I.
Oh, God, you know what? I didn't turn my page quick enough, did I? Thank you.
It's okay. They're pretty consolidated, so. My name is Brenda Nguyen. I manage the Office of Wetland and Stream Protection at DEQ Central Office. And we're here today to review the amendments to reissue Virginia Water Protection general permits in Chapter 660, 670, 680, and 690 of Title IX, the Virginia Administrative Code. Do I advance this? Oh, okay, thank you. So our Virginia general permits cover a wide variety of activities as noted on this slide, and they all expire on August 1st of 2026. They were first promulgated in 2001 as part of our Virginia non-tidal wetlands permit program, and will be our third reissuance of the 4 general permits. General permits are a streamlined permitting decision tool that the agency uses frequently. We average about 320 general permit coverages per year, and we had 261 in calendar year 2024. Paralleling this, the federal government has nationwide permits that are general permits as well, and we estimated they used them 1,000 times in calendar year 24. Some of that workload we anticipate coming to DEQ as a result of continual federal changes under the Clean Water Act, particularly to our understanding of what waters of the United States are. So the general permits will be very important as a tool to continue to use for our decisions and for the public to receive a timely decision, one that costs potentially less than an individual permit, and that they can receive pretty quickly. To date, we've done a notice of intended regulatory action, which was issued in October of 2024, and the comment ended in November of 2024. No comments were received on that. We convened a technical advisory committee, which met in March 2025, and representatives of many industries and proponents that use our general permits were in attendance. And we reached consensus on the proposed amendments as shown in tabs F, G, H, and I. So the proposed amendments really hinge on the transitional sections of our regulations. First, we'd like to repeal Section 25 as an obsolete provision that was put in the regulations for the last group of applicants and permittees that came into the process in 2016. So it's now an obsolete provision. There's one part of that, the duty to reapply for a permit, a new general permit, if you cannot complete the activities by the expiration of the general permit. That is a provision that's always been in our regulations, and it's a requirement in each of the general permits themselves. It's the very last condition of each of those permits, So we'd like to move that to Section 27 and keep Section 27 addressing all of the related provisions to the term of the permits, the need to reapply, and then what to do if you need to continue your activities past the expiration. So in 27, we also state and propose the new term for these regulations. We would like the general permits to be for another 10-year term, starting August 2nd, 2026, and ending August 1st, 2036. And then also in 27, we'd like to move the administrative continuance provision that's currently in Section 35 of each regulation to Section 27. So again, all the like topics are together in that one place. Administrative continuance deals with applicants who have reapplied for general permit coverage, but for whatever reason, the board cannot promulgate a new general permit on or before August 2nd, 2026. Oops, I think we have one, backup one, please. There we go. Another amendment we are proposing to do is replace the references in our regulation to the Virginia Erosion Sediment Control Handbook that are from 1992 and the Stormwater Handbook from 1999. We would like to replace that with the citation to Chapter 875 of Title IX of the Virginia Administrative Code. This is intended to not unintentionally set up conflicts between a Virginia water protection permit, general permit coverage, and a stormwater general permit or other VIPD's permit if the applicant's getting both. There are a lot of requirements in 875 now. That was consolidated regulation that completed in 2024, and we feel that this will be a better reference tool for the people getting permits from under both programs. The last set of edits that are amendments we would like to propose are editorial in nature, changing citations where we found errors or needed updates. An example would be we found an old reference to a code section that no longer is applicable and should be changed, and that dated back from when the stormwater program came to DEQ from DCR, and it just wasn't caught. Another example is changing our forms. At the end of each general permit regulation, there's a section of forms that need to be updated periodically, so there are some revisions to the dates on some of those forms. And then lastly, we have documents incorporated by reference in each regulation. And again, there needs to be some version updating, some title updating, and also some hyperlink updating. And those are all in each of the regulations. They're the same for all. Okay, I think we can move to questions now.
Any questions? No. Don't think so. Proceed, please.
I'll move to staff recommendations. DEQ staff recommends that the State Water Control Board approve the proposed general permit regulations, Chapter 660, 670, 680, and 690, as listed here. Also to authorize staff to proceed to notice of public comment and hearing, and authorize staff to be the hearing officer for the public hearing.
You've heard staff recommendation. What's your pleasure, board?
Madam Chair, I move that we accept the recommendation of staff regarding the proposed regulations.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, board, that takes us down to tab J in other business. We have the Virginia Clean Water Revolving Loan Fund, final authorization for the 2025 State Revolving Fund Supplement Appropriation for Hurricane Helene and Milton and the Hawaii wildfires. Ms. Mayfield.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the board. My name is Megan Mayfield. You may recognize my name. I was formerly the director of the water permitting program, but now I am the director of the Office of Clean Water Finance. And I am here today to present the Virginia Clean Water Revolving Loan Fund Supplemental Appropriation for Hurricanes Helene and/or Milton and Hawaii wildfires, which you will see as SAHMW for short inside the presentation. So the American Relief Act was passed on December 21st, 2024, which authorized funding to the EPA in Title VII of the Act, which included $3 billion in disaster relief supplemental funding for the state revolving loan programs. And so again, you're going to see the SAHMW abbreviation in here. I cannot say that mouthful this much this morning. So this money will be administered by DEQ under the Clean Water Revolving Loan Fund. It was only available to states or territories in EPA regions 3, 4, 9, of which Virginia is region 3, and we are eligible to apply. So we happily would like to apply because our allotment is just over $9.3 million in decentralized, in funds that are excluding decentralized funds. So Section 606 of the Federal Water Pollution Control Act requires the submission of the intended use plan and the project priority list. What's special about these funds is that the projects must reduce flood or fire damage risk and or vulnerability, enhancing resiliency to rapid hydrologic change or natural disasters at wastewater treatment works. So each of these projects must include a component of this in order to be eligible for the funds, of which DEQ will review to ensure. So this is being brought before the board as Section 62.1-229 of Chapter 22 of the Code of Virginia authorizes the State Water Control Board to establish to whom loans are made, the loan amounts, and the repayment terms. This also can only be used for folks that are affected within this FEMA map that was issued in October of 2024. Several areas, it was amended at the end of October. This is the most recent map. Several localities were added at their request to FEMA. So there are some additional areas in here. The project list, so that IUP, the intended use plan, and the project priority list, that PPL, it was put out for public comment through DEQ. It closed on June 20th, and no public comments were received as part of this public advertisement. So just in this instance, I know you all are familiar with the revolving loan process. We generally put out a solicitation period. However, in this instance, we have bypassed the use of the application in order to expedite this distribution of funds because it is greatly and desperately needed in that southwest portion of Virginia. I mean, as you can see just from this map here, the extent of the sewer line damage in Buchanan County is close to 30 miles. So DEQ's regional offices have done extensive outreach with all of the localities that were affected, as well as many meetings and outreach and coordination with the Governor's Office of Transformation, so their transformation team, to ensure that all of the funds for not just this one particular availability of funds, but all of the availability of funds that occurred after Hurricane Helene were being used efficiently, effectively, and that we were getting the biggest bang for our buck that we possibly could to get the help out there to these localities. So we also looked at demonstrated need, financial need, so which of these folks might not be able to even get a loan because they couldn't pass a financial audit or something like that. So they just desperately need it. So the projects that we determined were in the most need were the town of Fries, the town of Chilhowie, and Buchanan County Public Service Authority. So here's some detailed project information. You have a copy of this presentation with you, but it's also really small up here. But the town of Fries needed cleaning rehabilitation of 2 sewage lift station. A lot of wet wells were damaged. They need new sewage pumps. And a lot of wastewater treatment plant generator assembly because they have complete lack of secondary generator. So they requested $890,900, and we proposed to fund $890,900. The town of Chilhowie completely lost 3 aerial sewer crossings. Right now, they have temporary aerial sewer crossings, and they are doing a rental of these pumping units to the tune of around $20,000 a month. And so we are looking to get those replaced as soon as we possibly can so they can stop bleeding out on those funds. And then there's also some gravity sewer and some smaller items that need to be repaired. They requested $2.28 million. We proposed to fund $2.28 million. Buchanan County is in a great need. They need improvements of about 30 manholes, 20 sanitary sewer laterals. And again, if you go back to this picture, the extent of the sewer line damage in Buchanan County that needs immediate repair is pretty extensive. They requested $8.9 million. We are proposing to fund $6.1 million. And those are the 3 projects. And so any questions regarding any of this?
Any questions for Ms. Mayfield?
Yes, Ms. Mayfield. What are the terms of these grants? Are they repaid over time at a market rate, or how does that work?
So these three, even though we're calling them loans, will be 100% principal forgiveness. It will be like a grant. We just do not want to call it a grant because then they have to adhere to different requirements that they might not be able to adhere to. So the bottom line is that this will be 100% principal forgiveness. They will be not taking on these localities will not be taking on any additional debt from us giving this money. So they will not have to do any of the normal processes they will through VRA with regards to ensuring that they can get passing credit checks and all of that. That will not occur. So that's also going to expedite this process. So there will be no additional debt borne by any of these localities for these funds being given to them.
Very good. I commend the department for what you're doing here, because increasing the resiliency of these critical stormwater pollution control facilities is very, very important. And as we see more of these types of disasters occur, these communities, especially smaller ones, just have a very difficult time given the cost of this infrastructure. So nice work. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Yap.
Ms. Mayfield, I note that we appear to be only being able to satisfy about 2/3 of the need for Buchanan County. What's your sense of how the county will be able to fill the rest of that gap?
So Buchanan County actually needs a larger rehabilitation of their entire system. The gravity lines are currently in the stream beds and the creek beds in all of the valleys. And so they actually need a greater overhaul to the tune of between $60 and $80 million in order to renovate that. What we're doing is pretty much getting the repairs that need to prevent the continued release of raw domestic sewage that is untreated into the waterways that is flowing into additional territories. And so what they plan to do as part of this, and we've been in contact with them, is that start this rehabilitation process, get these areas fixed as best we can. And they are also trying to get a engineering plan that identifies and really filters down more what is needed to prevent this from happening again, and that's going to unfortunately be a longer process. Buchanan County is in a better situation than these other localities, and that they are potentially able to take on a small amount of loans through a revolving loan, but there are also, we have another meeting with some other localities, but there are some other programs that the VRA has to help those in immediate need. The emergency funds were just authorized this year. So there are additional avenues for them to be able to pursue these funds. And the revolving loan period is also open right now. So they could do an official loan through the revolving loan to finish or complete this $2+ million gap.
Any other comments or questions? You may proceed.
All right. So the staff recommendation is that the board authorize the execution of loan agreements for the 3 projects listed in the project priority list, as well as the loan amounts with full principal forgiveness, resulting in no additional debt to be borne by the locality recipients of these loans.
You've heard staff recommendation. What's the board's pleasure today?
Madam Chair, I move that we adopt the staff recommendation.
Second.
I have a motion and I have a second. Thank you. Any other further discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Motion carries.
Thank you.
Now, under other business, we're going to look at the notification to the board, the submission to the EPA of vessel no discharge zone designations for water bodies in the Northern Neck by Mr. Williams. Thank you. That's in tab K.
Good morning. Good morning again, Madam Chair, members of the board. I'm Justin Williams, the manager of the Office of Watersheds and Local Government Assistance at DEQ. Today, we wanted to just provide a notification or general overview of status and where we are with the potential application to establish no discharge zones and water bodies through the Northern Neck area. I'll talk a little bit about the background, the process, and then the next steps including what goes into the final application that is submitted to EPA. Just by point of reference, a no discharge zone is a vessel sewage no discharge zone area where the discharge of both treated and untreated sewage from all vessels is prohibited under the Federal Clean Water Act. Currently, all untreated sewage is prohibited from discharge. This would expand and include that sewage which is treated. There's significant both state and federal laws and regulations which govern this process, including sections of the Clean Water Act, as well as the state code, which provides the criteria and authority for the designations of NDZs in Virginia. Specifically at the federal level, there's common considerations or elements that have to be addressed, including the environmental need, the adequacy of pump outs, and that the protection will help to achieve water quality improvement for the area. The overall process begins with the engagement and review of NDZ requests. In this particular instance, as with other NDZs that have been established, the Northern Neck Planning District Commission worked with DEQ to identify areas for potential NDZs. We then evaluate water body, pump out, and effects, working with those stakeholders and other interested individuals, hold public meetings, and then provide the notification as a result of that to the Water Board today. The next step in this process would be for the Secretary of Natural and Historic Resources, on behalf of the Commonwealth, to submit the application to EPA. EPA then has its own public comment process as it's laid out in the Federal Register, and then if adopted or approved by the EPA, it would come back to the board through a federal exempt action to include the NDZ among the existing list of water bodies in the regulation. This provides, and is included within the board's presentation and material, the area of the proposed water bodies, which essentially makes up those 4 counties within the Northern Neck portion of the Commonwealth of Virginia, including the Richmond, Lancaster, Northumberland, and the additional counties identified there, along with the water bodies and the pump outs that were identified working with VDH and marinas in the areas. As a part of this process, we look at the Northern Neck water quality considerations. As the board may be aware, the water bodies within this area include public and private shellfish leases and grounds. Additionally, 5 of these areas identified by VMRC as being in the top 25 agricultural sites in the state. These water bodies have shellfish grounds which have had or currently or have had shellfish grounds closings or impairments. They suffer from slow or intermittent flushing and have been identified as being impaired through our 303D process. As mentioned, additional considerations, aside from the ecological or environmental value, is the ability for the water bodies or the areas to be able to address the pump out that would then be required by virtue of not allowing discharging treated water, treated sewage from these boats. We, through this process, identified 25 public facilities that have pump outs. A part of this exercise and process was using various data to identify the number of vessels that could potentially need a pump out using a high vessel weekend, in particular, specifically July 4th weekend, and then compare that to the existing pump out vessel service capacity in the area, including both the number of pump outs that are available as well as any existing load that would go to the corresponding wastewater treatment plants that would receive the discharge. This application has received significant stakeholder engagement from the beginning to the current stage in the process. That included most recently publication on the Virginia Town Hall and in the Register of the proposed potential for a no discharge zone application, as well as specific notices to stakeholders, marinas, and prior interested parties, including most recently a visit to the marinas in the last 2 years to ensure current information and notification was provided. We additionally had 4 final public meetings based on the current draft of the application in each of the counties in earlier February and March of this year, as well as to have a public comment period that accompanied those meetings and received 6 supportive comments as a part of that process. This is in addition to, as I mentioned, the significant public engagement that occurred prior to and throughout the process. So with that, I'll see if the board has any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Williams?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the board.
Thank you. Next on other business is update on Virginia DEQ's Water Division, the PFAS activities. Mr. Wheeler and Mr. Zahadra. I keep working on their name, I'm sorry, all these years.
All right. Good morning, Madam Chairman and members of the board. I am Dr. Max Wheeler, and I am going to be presenting an update on Virginia DEQ's Water Division's PFAS activities alongside my colleague, Neil. Over the course of this presentation, we're going to cover a few objectives. We're going to start with what are PFAS before turning into the Virginia DEQ's activities around ambient water quality monitoring, Virginia's PFAS regulatory requirements, and source identification efforts. Once we've covered those topics, I'm going to pass it over to Neil so he can present on how PFAS intersects with his biosolids program. So, starting with what are PFAS? PFAS, despite us using this name, is actually an acronym. It stands for per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, which is defined under Virginia State Water Control Law as any substance containing a fully fluorinated methyl or methylene carbon atom. When we talk about PFAS, we're talking about a family of compounds. Under the definition that we are using here in Virginia, there are tens of thousands of chemicals that fit that definition with hundreds of uses. Some of those uses are shown for you here on the screen. In general, PFAS get used when you need a product to be waterproof or water resistant, oil-proof or oil resistant, stain-proof or stain resistant, or otherwise non-stick. And so they show up in a wide variety of consumer products that way. But also, they show up in firefighting foams. Because of the strong carbon-fluorine bond, they are very effective at putting out Class B fires. And these are fires of petroleum products, things like gasoline and jet fuels. And so they'll often get used in those types of situations as well. When we talk about PFAS as this family of chemicals, it's also worth noting that when we regulate them as individual molecules. So when we are talking throughout this presentation, when we're referring to this family of chemicals, we'll call them PFAS, but when we're referring to any of the individual chemicals, we'll refer to them by their initials. For example, PFOA or PFOS, rather than trying to use the mouthful chemical name, something like perfluorooctanoic acid, we'll keep it simple as PFOA. PFAS have been shown to have many health effects in humans, as well as the environment. The health effects of just two of the most commonly studied PFAS, PFOA and PFOS, are shown here on the screen. We see things like cancer effects, including prostate, kidney, and testicular cancers, immune effects like the reduced ability for the body to fight infections, as well as reduced vaccine responses. And we also see reproductive effects, things like decreased fertility, increased blood pressure in pregnant women. Where we're next going to turn our attention is into the regulations that the Virginia General Assembly has passed for Virginia DEQ. There are also regulations at the federal level, but we're going to leave those aside for now and focus in on those Virginia regulations. The Virginia General Assembly has been taking action each of the last 4 years on PFAS, at least as it pertains to Virginia DEQ. The first of those regulations happened in the 2022 General Assembly session, where the General Assembly allocated funding for surface and groundwater monitoring. Then in the 2023 session, the General Assembly established rules for publicly owned treatment works to require certain dischargers to test their discharges for PFAS as a result of some contamination in the Roanoke River. Then last year's General Assembly gave DEQ quite the focus, requiring DEQ to perform PFAS source assessments for drinking water systems with detections of PFAS above EPA's maximum contaminant levels, which were regulations at the federal level finalized in April of 2024. Then in this most recent General Assembly session, they required certain facilities in the Occoquan watershed to monitor for PFAS and ensure the concentrations of PFAS in their discharge levels do not exceed EPA's drinking water maximum contaminant levels. This law goes into effect tomorrow. We've already notified the applicable facilities of this requirement, but I'll have much more to say about this in future updates. Turning our attention to Virginia's ambient PFAS monitoring. DEQ started monitoring for PFAS in December of 2021 as a result of notification of PFAS in the Chickahominy River. That monitoring then expanded statewide over the intervening years, where we have sampled for fish tissue entirely across the state, surface water entirely across the state, and fish tissue in most of the river basins. Currently, our programs are piggybacking on top of our existing monitoring efforts, and so we'll continue to monitor fish tissue in additional basins as they make their way through the rotation. The last thing that I'll mention on this particular slide at this point is that all of this data is available on DEQ's website under our Special Topics PFAS page, where you can explore this map interactively, as well as download any of the data if you desire. Turning our attention to the drinking water source reduction in the 2024 General Assembly. Here, two bills are passed, House Bill 1085 and Senate Bill 243. These mirror bills direct DEQ to conduct PFAS source assessments for each public water supply for which DEQ has received notification from the Virginia Department of Health that this system has had a maximum contaminant level exceedance in its finished water. So what this essentially requires us to do is identify the significant sources in these waters, upstream of these water systems, and propose regulatory and non-regulatory options for reducing those PFAS levels. In order to conduct these source assessments, DEQ was given two new authorities. First, to require the self-reporting of PFAS manufacture or use, as well as to require representative quarterly discharge monitoring from these facilities that may be significant PFAS contributors. In addition to being given two new authorities, DEQ was also given several directives. The first of which was to form an expert advisory committee to advise DEQ as well as the Department of Health on PFAS-related issues pertaining to these source assessments. This committee has met 3 times since the law was enacted in July of last year, the most recent of which was on May 30th of this year. And the next meeting will be later in August. We'll be finalizing the scheduling here later this week. Minutes from these meetings are available on Virginia's Regulatory Town Hall if you're interested in seeing what we've been discussing. In addition to forming that expert advisory committee, DEQ is also required to write an annual report, which is due to the General Assembly on October 1st of each year. The first of those reports is available on the Legislative Information System and DEQ's website if you're interested, but that only covers the first 3 months of this bill's implementation, and then in the 9 months since, there have been a lot of actions that have been taken that we'll be talking about on the next couple of slides. You can look for the next edition in October of this year with much of this information as well. And then the last directive that we were given was for public water systems for which DEQ was notified of having an exceedance on or before September 1st, 2024, to issue notice to these applicable facilities to self-report or monitor prior to December 1st of 2024. These notifications to self-report and or monitor were sent out just before Thanksgiving last fall, and we're going to talk a little bit more on the next slide about what was in these notifications, as well as how we sent these notifications. So, on September 1st, 2024, DEQ was aware of 27 drinking water systems that had a PFAS exceedance. Those systems are shown here on the map, as well as their source areas. These source areas are where they get their water from, and we define those source areas as the entire watershed upstream for each of the drinking water systems. And for the groundwater systems, we selected a 3-mile radius. This 3-mile radius was chosen based off of professional judgment. We then looked within those watersheds for any holders of VPDS permits, as well as any significant industrial users within the publicly owned treatment works. We then filtered those permit holders based off of EPA's list of PFAS handling industries and selected only those facilities that are on EPA's list of PFAS handling industries and are in the source waters of these systems. In total, there were 185 letters sent requiring facilities to self-report and or monitor. The self-reporting was due on February 24th of this year and is available in our May 30th Expert Advisory Committee minutes if you're interested. The monitoring was set to begin in April to June of this current calendar year. Those results are coming in. We've had about 50 facilities respond so far, but we haven't done any analysis of that data just yet. I expect to have some of that information available at the next Expert Advisory Committee meeting in August. DEQ is planning on continuing its ambient monitoring in 2025. this year taking a slightly different approach. Rather than trying to get spatial coverage in our surface water samples, we're instead focusing on temporal coverage in those watersheds where we have known PFAS exceedances in the drinking water. This is meant to complement the effluent monitoring requiring facilities to do, in essence, making sure we're capturing everything that's moving through those streams and make sure that we're not missing anything in between. In addition, we are doing fish tissue sampling, specifically in the Occoquan River Basin, the York River Basin, and some of the tidal tributaries of the Chesapeake. Those are shown in the blue squares on this particular map. These sites are not final. We're going to choose a subset of those based off of where the fish populations are at time of sampling. And where I'll end before I hand it over to Neil is to just let you know about all of the drinking water systems across the state that have PFAS exceedances. In total, there are 58 unique systems that have PFAS exceedances as of April 2025. The Department of Health sent me their July notification at 6 p.m. on Friday, and based off of the headlines that they gave to me in there are no additional unique systems, but I haven't double-checked their analysis yet to be sure. We can see when we look at this map some clustering in the Loudoun and Fauquier counties. This is as a result of those two counties both being very proactive in their sampling and reporting their data to the Department of Health. We can also see another small cluster in the Roanoke area and another small cluster of two drinking water systems in Norfolk and Newport News down in the Virginia Beach area that also have exceedances. The one thing that I will mention on this map before I hand it over to Neil is that all of the data for the drinking water systems is available on VDH's website in an interactive map. So you're welcome to go to each of these systems and see what they've sampled and how much was in each of these drinking water systems finished water, as well as see all the other systems that have been sampled and what their values are as well, if you're so inclined. And so with that, I'll pause and hand it over to Neil.
Again, I'm Neil Zarodka, Madam Chair, members of the board. I'm going to talk a little bit about our biosolids program. And as I start, it's important to make sure we're all on the same page with respect to some terms and the terminology, the basic concepts. If it's one thing I've learned over these years of managing the program, it's never safe to assume the basics are understood. So we're going to start with the basics and move forward from there. So sewage is human waste to which we all contribute. And when you flush a toilet, it either goes to a sewer system leading to a wastewater treatment plant, or if you're in a rural area, it goes to a septic tank, which at some point in time will be pumped and end up at a wastewater treatment plant again. So at the treatment plant, the liquids are separated from solids, and that liquid portion is managed through our VIPDs program and treated and discharged to surface waters. In most cases, sewage sludge is then that residual material that remains during treatment. And production of sewage sludge is just an essential component of wastewater treatment. And so because our human bodies are not completely efficient at managing all of the nutrients that we take in, sewage sludge contains a significant amount of nutrients. But it also contains pathogens and may contain other pollutants or contaminants that are picked up from things that we take into our bodies or other things that have made its way into the sewer system. So the treatment that's required to reduce pathogens and ensure that those pollutant levels in the sewage sludge are below regulatory limits is what makes sewage sludge into biosolids. The treatment standards for that material and the pollutant concentration levels for the material are set by both state and federal regulation. Sewage sludge must have undergone that minimum level of treatment and monitoring to become biosolids before it can be safely recycled into a nutrient-rich fertilizer. The significant residual nutrient content is what makes farmers want to use biosolids. And in addition, that organic matter that's left over in that material also improves soil structure and moisture holding capacity in ways that commercial fertilizer just does not. The permits that DEQ issues allowing biosolids to be applied as fertilizer include both the state and the federal requirements for treatment and those pollutant concentration levels, so that pathogens are not transmitted through the material, that pollutants are below those regulatory limits, and that the land application sites are managed so that the pollutants in biosolids don't become pollutants in the environment. So there are three primary mechanisms for management of sewage sludge. Land application is that primary means of management. Most sewage sludge in Virginia is treated to become biosolids, and is land applied as fertilizer. Landfilling may also be used to dispose of sewage sludge. And I'll note that surface disposal, which is a term you'll hear later when we talk about the risk assessment, and landfilling are different. Any landfill that accepts sewage sludge in Virginia must be permitted and must follow the requirements of the Virginia Solid Waste Management Regulation. Sewage sludge may also be incinerated, but that practice is relatively limited in Virginia, and it's not widespread. And it's really important to note that there's limited capacity in landfills, as well as at incineration facilities, for the amount of sewage sludge that's produced in Virginia. If land application were not allowed, there's not enough land application or incineration capacity, either in the state or nationally, to deal with the amounts. So all wastewater treatment plants that produce biosolids for land application are permitted, whether in Virginia under the VIPD's permit regulation or federal or other state requirements if that material is produced out of state. The wastewater treatment plant, those permits contain standards for the pollutants that may be contained in the biosolids, as well as the treatment that material must undergo. They also have monitoring requirements and reporting requirements. The plant then may choose to land apply that material under its own permit if they're in Virginia, or enter into a contract with a land applier that's permitted in Virginia. The plant pays a fee of $7.50 for every dry ton of Class B biosolids that's land applied in Virginia. That fee is used by DEQ to administer the regulatory program. And that fee and structure was established by the Virginia General Assembly in 2007. A land application contractor then contracts with the wastewater plant to land apply material for a set fee. The land applier identifies farmers who wish to receive biosolids as fertilizer. And each contractor must obtain a VPA permit in each county in which they apply, and then the permit identifies specific location where land application may occur. Farmers and landowners are not permitted. The land applier must provide the landowner with information in a fact sheet that's approved by DEQ, and the landowners must consent in writing to have biosolids applied on their property. The landowner agreements certify that the landowner has received a copy of the DEQ fact sheet that describes the biosolids and the requirements to mitigate risk. We have received some criticism from commenters on permits that they've asked about the information DEQ includes in that fact sheet. And we do provide information about the work that EPA does to evaluate additional pollutants in biosolids every 2 years. And we do plan to update that fact sheet once EPA finalizes the PFAS risk assessment for biosolids. So in each one of these permits, they contain identical requirements as the federal for the treatment of the material, as well as the pollutant content levels, identical in Virginia and the federal regulation. But because of requirements that the Virginia General Assembly has put on DEQ, Virginia law and regulation also require considerably more restrictions, and those include setbacks from wells, homes, property lines, and publicly accessible sites, all of that in addition to the surface water setback that's established in the federal regulation. It also includes requirements for rates and timing in nutrient management plans, including phosphorus, where the federal regulation only considers nitrogen. It also includes site conditions such as soil characteristics, slopes, and proximity to the water table. These permits include notification to the public prior to permitting for land application and liability insurance requirements. There's also requires an authorization for local authorities to apply additional restrictions where there might be biosolids storage. Permits require, the statute requires requirements for unannounced inspections by DEQ staff, as well as mandatory training for persons who are land applying Class B biosolids. So the permitting process is extensive. So before a land applier can get a permit, they apply for that permit with DEQ. They've received potential land application sites. They've reviewed those sites for suitability, and they've secured agreements with the farm operators and the landowners. Land appliers must also meet the requirements for financial assurance. Most of the time, this is in the form of a liability policy. The land applier then prepares site books according to DEQ specifications, and those books contain maps. They describe the sites, and they also include the landowner agreements for each of those sites. The permit applicant also prepares a list of proposed sources of biosolids, where they're coming from. The applicant then submits that permit application along with their fee to DEQ. DEQ reviews that permit for completeness, notifies the locality, the Virginia Department of Health, as well as the Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation. DEQ solicits comments from VDH regarding public health issues and DCR with respect to any nutrient management issues. So DEQ reviews those site books for completeness, for accuracy, and we review the source list of biosolids to ensure that all of those sources have been approved by DEQ. And we also conduct an in-field site visit to ground truth the information that's in that application. Anytime there's a new permit in a county, or if there's a permit that's adding more than 50% of the land previously included in that initial issuance of the permit, DEQ will conduct a public meeting in the locality to educate the public regarding the application and solicit comments and concerns from adjoining landowners. We notify adjoining landowners before that meeting by mail, and we also publish public notice of that meeting in the newspaper. We then draft a permit, and then we follow our permit public notice process as with other water permits, with newspaper public notice, soliciting public comments, and as well as the opportunity to request and hold a hearing. So following, we review those comments, and then we make a permit decision, which may involve granting that permit as it's requested, modifying it, or denying the permit is also an option. So biosolid source approval is conducted on every source of material that's land applied in Virginia. And this technical review includes a review of the historical biosolids analyses, and typically that's at least 3 consecutive years in the last 5 years, 3 consecutive months within the last 5 years. And these analyses must have been conducted by a VLAP-approved lab. We also look at those analyses for limitations on non-heavy metals and look at the data that the plant submits describing the methods and the processes for biosolids treatment. We require the same standards for all sources of biosolids, whether they're produced in Virginia or produced out of state. And those standards, again, are those that are prescribed in law and regulation. So Virginia as a whole has been regulating biosolids for decades, either by the Virginia Department of Health or by DEQ. And we've been regulating biosolids land application in accordance with the current structure since 2008. There have been some advances in treatment technology that have reduced the amount of biosolids that's applied in Virginia over the last 10 years. And so currently, approximately 116,000 dry tons of biosolids are spread annually on about 40,000 acres in the state, which works out to be on average about 3 dry tons per acre. We have heard from some commenters on permits concerned about biosolids from sources in Maryland. Maryland biosolids are applied in both states, and it's been a routine occurrence for Maryland biosolids to come to Virginia and be land applied in Virginia. So this graph shows the history of the amount of Maryland material that's been land applied since 2017. And that average amount works out to be about 24,000 dry tons per year. That lower amount, that dip in 2018, was due to some very wet weather that year that limited land application. So this map is sourced from a survey that was conducted by the Environmental Council of the States, and it was published in April of this year. And it identifies states that have established guidelines or regulations concerning how PFAS in biosolids is to be managed. Virginia, like the majority of other states, does not have guidelines or regulations for PFAS in biosolids. And we're waiting for EPA, like most other states, to develop further federal guidance on how to address those limits and prescriptions. So EPA, following the biennial review that was identifying PFOA and PFOS as potential contaminants that should be looked at, released a draft risk assessment for PFOA and PFOS in biosolids on January 14th of this year. This draft risk assessment focuses on persons who are living on or near land application sites. For example, farm families or their neighbors. And they also looked at persons who might rely primarily on the products such as food crops, animal products, as well as drinking water that's affected by that land application site. The draft risk assessment in its current form does not address risk for the general public. And that risk assessment is asking one basic question. Is there a problem with PFAS in biosolids, and do we need to regulate it? So I will note that the draft risk assessment also spoke to the concept of surface disposal of sewage sludge. Surface disposal is an EPA term that refers to placing sewage sludge in what is essentially a monofill. That practice is not allowed under Virginia regulation. Any sewage sludge that would be put into the ground must follow the Virginia Solid Waste Management regulations. So the risk assessment also mentioned incineration, but it indicated that there's just not enough data yet to quantitatively model the risk from biosolids incineration. I also note that incineration of biosolids is limited. There are 4 facilities that HRSD operates that incinerate biosolids. There are also 2 in Northern Virginia, as well as 1 in the city of Hopewell. So the risk assessment that EPA put out and is currently in its draft form is not a regulatory mechanism, and it's not intended to be used as a benchmark for establishing regulatory limits. It also didn't include any comparison to other sources of exposure. It does note, though, that there are certain management practices that could serve to mitigate risk, but it doesn't quantify those effects. And this risk management component is missing at this stage from the risk assessment that EPA is looking at, and is a necessary step before we would move to, or before EPA would move to a regulatory component. So some of those mitigating practices to mitigate risk are included in the Virginia requirements for biosolids land application, such as those additional setbacks to surface waters and wells, that separation distance between soil above bedrock and groundwater, as well as the timing and rate restrictions that we have on biosolids included in nutrient management plans. Those practices are not modeled in the draft risk assessment. And it's also of note that in the draft risk assessment is that they pick a particular land application rate as an average. And in Virginia, the average application rate is approximately 1/3 of that was modeled in the risk assessment. So as far as next steps for the program, the comment period on the EPA draft risk assessment has been extended until August 14th of this year, and the EPA will then determine next steps. EPA Administrator Zedlin confirmed that commitment in a statement that he made on April 28th, said that EPA will finish the public comment period for the biosolids risk assessment and determine the path forward based on comments. EPA also noted that they're going to be working with Congress to establish that liability lies with the polluter and not with passive receivers such as wastewater treatment plants. So as the science progresses, Virginia will follow the federal requirements that are applicable to all states and follow any directives that the Virginia General Assembly give us, as we have for previous years, such as the most recent legislation in the Occoquan Reservoir for 2025. DEQ will also continue its focus on identifying sources of PFAS affecting drinking water systems with exceedances, as well as continuing that ambient monitoring of PFAS in both water column and fish tissue that Max explained earlier. So that concludes our presentation, and Max or I are happy to respond to any questions that you have.
Thank you. Do you have any questions, Board? Mr. Cameron?
First of all, I want to thank you both very much for that very detailed and excellent presentation. So, question for Mr. Wheeler. In terms of the self-reporting requirements, what's your sense of the degree of compliance with those self-reporting, and are there any consequences if people do not self-report?
I believe all but 9 facilities have responded to our letter so far. We are working on warning letters to be sent to them. I believe I saw in my email that we were given the thumbs up to send them. I can't speak to whether the person who will be pressing send has done so yet, but that should be coming very shortly. Of those that did respond, 70% reported no PFAS use or manufacture. And those that did had a scattering of products, some that are AFFF used in firefighting foams, as well as some who are using Teflon tape and WD-40, which do have some PFAS in them. And then there's a scattering of others that haven't dug into too deeply yet.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments? Mr. Yob?
Yes, gentlemen, you know, the thing that's very concerning to me, and I'll be following this closely because the biosolids in the land application, I think you said there's, what, 105,000 tons or so in the Commonwealth that's land applied, and there really isn't adequate land disposal capability at landfills. So, you know, we really need to be, in my view, planning for what's going to come next, and I don't know. The future is not clear on that now, especially as you consider, you know, down the road food chain impacts potentially from those land application sites. So I'll be very interested in following through, and I hope you'll continue to update us on the results of these studies, because this is a very serious matter.
Thank you. Any more questions, concerns? Thank you, Mr. Wheeler. Next, we have a report to the board regarding controversial permits. Mr. Thomas, you have a couple that you want to present to us today.
Yes, thank you. I have control of this? Thank you. So, good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board. My name is Bryant Thomas. I am our interim director of the Water Division at DEQ. And I'm here this morning to present to you a controversial permit report. So state law provides that your regular meetings that we, DEQ, the department, shall provide an overview and update regarding any controversial permit pending before the department. And a controversial permit is simply, and it includes water permitting actions for which a public hearing has been granted. And so this update serves to satisfy the legislative requirement. I'm going to be presenting 3 permits this morning for you that are controversial permits. 2 of them you have heard from before, either from me in March or even prior to that at some of the earlier meetings. The first is for Synagro LLC in Essex County. And as you heard from Mr. Zaratka just a few minutes ago about the land application of biosolids, this particular permitting action is a permit modification request for the Synagro permit in Essex County. It's the Virginia Pollution Abatement, or VPA permit, number VPA 00831. Synagro holds contracts with multiple wastewater treatment plants to land apply biosolids, as we just learned. The regulations require a separate permit for each county in which biosolids are land applied by that land applier. Each permit authorizes multiple land application sites, and a modification is required when adding new land application sites. As far as looking at the timeline of events, the permit for Synagro, and I will mention that these VPA permits are also a 10-year permit term. So our first permit issuance for Synagro was in July of 2016. We had a previous modification approved which added additional acreage for land application. Initially, the permit was for 15,331 acres. The modification in 2019 added 4,330 acres, and then we received an application request in July of 2024 to add additional acreages, an additional 6,337 acres. And to give you a sense of what this looks like, each county for each land applier has a permit authorization. You can see on the top right map where Essex County is located in the Commonwealth, and then the call-out map in the center shows in green the currently authorized land application locations, and then the burgundy color is the requested additional sites. So currently authorized for 19,426 acres and proposed addition of 6,337 additional acres, which would bring a total to 25,759 acres. Continuing the timeline, Mr. Zaratka just talked to you about some of the permit process and some of the items included in that. The key things I would point out here are the public comment period that was held on the draft permit between early January and through February 7th. We held a public hearing on May 19th of this year. The comment period associated with that public hearing extended from April 16 through June 4. And we anticipate or looking forward to see the next hearing on the public summary, or the summary of public comments in late July, August, and would expect a final permit action sometime later in August of this year. I would make note that the comments received regarding this permitting action are primarily focused on PFAS and PFAS concerns, as well as Neil did mention, out-of-state biosolids from Maryland coming in and being land applied in Virginia. So I'll pause there before moving to the next permit to see if you have any questions.
Any questions before we move on? You may continue.
So the next permit, again, one that you've heard from several times, and I want to provide the most recent update. This is for a Virginia Water Protection Permit, a VWP permit. It is specifically for the surface water withdrawal for the Rappahannock River water supply, and Caroline County is the applicant for this. This is, whereas our prior permit was a modification to existing permit, this is a new permit authorization. These VWP permits have a permit term of 15 years. You've seen this timeline before, much of it, this page, and I'll just call out a couple key things here. That the public comment period on the draft permit was May 18 through June 18 of last year, so 2024. We held a public hearing in September of last year. And then following the public hearing and comments received, we received an updated summary of water demand projections from the applicant in early December of 2024. Upon review of that information, DEQ requested additional information and modeling to evaluate the potential impacts, and all final supporting materials for the application were received by DEQ on May 20th of this year. We have provided an updated draft. This would be the third draft permit to the applicant, and that was on June 17th. Looking forward, we expect to be holding a public hearing and comment period for this permit in late July, August time period. We would look in September for a summary of public comments hearing, and then final action on the permit expected in the October timeframe. And I'll pause there for any questions.
Any questions? You may continue.
And then the last permit to bring before you as far as controversial permits is one that is new on the docket. This is for a Virginia Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permit, or VPDS permit. It is for the U.S. Army Garrison Fort Belvoir. This is a permit reissuance in this particular case. So we had a modification, a new issuance, and now a reissuance. The VPDS permits have a permit term of 5 years. And if we look at the timeline with this permitting action, we prepared a draft permit that was public noticed just earlier this year, February 7th through March 10. We had a public hearing on June 2nd of this year. And then the public hearing comment period extended from May 2nd through June 18th. And looking ahead, we would expect in the August time period, maybe August, September, for a summary of public comments hearing, and then perhaps later in September, looking forward for final permit action on this reissuance. And I would note as well that the concerns on this particular permit reissuance and public comments and comments raised at the public hearing really were focused on concerns around PFAS.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda is an update on the Mountain Valley Pipeline. That's Ms. Davenport.
Madam Chair, members of the board, I am here to request to provide an update on the status of the Mountain Valley Pipeline. Oops. As I have reported, I believe this is the 4th board meeting. The pipeline is in active service, and the project status is maintaining and achieving post-restoration. That really is getting permanent vegetation in place, making sure that erosion and sediment controls stay active and working until such time as that permanent stabilization is in place. And we are out on the pipeline on a regular basis. So again, primary activity is to maintain E&S controls until we have permanent vegetation. Director Rolban kind of chuckled because he said, "You've been saying the laydown yards have been in restoration for a year now." And in fact, the majority of the laydown yards have in fact been restored. Those that are necessary to be maintained for continuing E&S controls are in place. As you can see, we are seeing an awful lot of vegetative growth, both on the route and also on the laydown yards. Again, overseeding, restabilization. Just for your, let me pull out my statistics here. Just give me one sec. The requirements are such that MVP has to inspect, even in this post-construction restoration phase, every 4 days. They have to be out looking at every location. Our contract MBP, which is our contract inspection, is out on the pipeline every day, and then our actual DEQ staff is out weekly, going back to the sites that we know are engaged in active restoration. Between March 22nd of this year and June 18th, we investigated 4 complaints. We conducted 35 compliance inspections, and again, our third-party compliance inspector conducted 357. We issued 41 notices for corrective action. There were no issues of noncompliance after that corrective action period, and from the period of January through March of this year, we did not assess any stipulated penalties under the 2017 consent decree. There was a newspaper article that was published in the Roanoke Times the middle of this month, which was also picked up by the Richmond Times-Dispatch, and Director Rolban mentioned to me that there had been some comments from board members. So I went ahead and dug into the article, talked to our inspectors, and interestingly enough, when I saw the pictures in that article, and the picture on the right with the red circle, is a part of the right-of-way that is Poor Mountain, is what it's called. It's actually near Honeysuckle Road. And I looked at that picture in the article and I thought, oh my gosh, that doesn't look like anything has happened. So I asked our DEQ inspectors to go back to the site to take a look at what is going on in that area, to compare it with the post-restoration and stabilization plans. And the picture on the right was taken by DEQ inspectors on June 28th. And actually, that stretch of the right-of-way is in compliance with post-construction plans. There is a significant amount of riprap that's been installed there. There is matting. There is dry vegetation because, again, we are trying to get to permanent, healthy vegetation. But our inspectors confirmed that that part of the right-of-way is in compliance. I also want to take a minute. As you all know, I am not an E&S person, and I have often called upon John McCutcheon, who has been our primary inspector and overseeing all of the work. John retired, I want to say in February or March of this year. So we have a new staff person, Zach Robinson, who is with me today here in case you have more specific questions. But Zach is now the team lead for stormwater compliance and is managing our 2 inspectors that are out on the Mountain Valley project. Another picture that we saw, again, on the left was also sort of the next hump in the right-of-way around Poor Mountain and Bent Mountain. And again, from a distance, it may look like we are not seeing the kind of stabilization that we need, but the slide on the right is a picture that our inspectors took in January where you can see there is vegetation coming up. It's a process, but we are working on it. One other thing that caught my eye as I read the article is that there was concern expressed, and actually concern had been expressed to you when we were initially considering the permits for this project about the steepness of the slopes on the right-of-way. And the article noted that 67% of the pipeline, because of the steep slopes, was susceptible to landslides. For those of you who are on the board, that was an issue that both FERC considered and you all considered. In the Upland one, we had some special reports and studies and mitigation requirements in case there were landslides. I just wanted to report that of the 107 miles of right-of-way in Virginia, approximately 1,600 acres was actually right-of-way land disturbance. There was additional maybe 500 acres related to the laydown yards and access roads. But as far as actual right-of-way construction, it was approximately 1,600 acres of disturbed land. And of that, we have 2 reported incidents in which there were land slips, which required engineering buttressing because, again, of the steep slopes. And that equaled about 3/4 of an acre of land disturbance. So just wanted to say that the numbers demonstrate that although there may have been approximately 67% of the lines susceptible to landslides, that we saw virtually no significant landslides, and the slips equaled less than an acre. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions if you have them.
Any questions for Ms. Davenport?
Madam Chair, I have one. Do you know if they're putting primarily natives in for vegetation?
Yes.
Then that would be the reason for most of it not taking, because natives take 2 to 3 years, correct?
And we have a reseeding schedule, or well, let's say, let me rephrase that. MVP has provided a reseeding schedule, and we know it will take multiple applications of seeding and growing seasons. But we are watching to make sure we are not seeing impacts as that vegetation is establishing itself. And that's why we're still out there inspecting on a regular basis.
I know DCR is pushing natives more than anything, but without taking into consideration the issue with environmental, it not growing and stabilizing soil, because they're more interested in the natives than the erosion. So.
And I understand there's a difference in root depth and root structure.
I'll just add, as it has been a source of discussion between the different agencies, we do allow some non-native erosion control cover crops as well, and that's been helping. Some of the problem has been the multiple layers of fabric that you'll see in some of those pictures. Because of the time duration, as they were deteriorating, they had to add more layers. So it's all inhibiting some of the growth. So it's a fine line between natives and non-natives. And so our staff's trying to work with everybody because we have to deal with the other agencies as well. But you're 100% correct that the native species take 2 to 4 years, depending upon the species, to germinate and grow. And in the meantime, we have these problems.
Any further questions, comments? Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Next on the agenda is future meeting dates, and I'm assuming that's forthcoming
That will be forthcoming, yes.
as we work through that. Okay. And also, we have a public forum today.
We had one person that did sign up, Tyler Matson. I actually don't see her in the room. She's entering the room right now.
I'm having a hard time hearing you, Ms. Porterfield.
Tyler Matson. Sorry, it's not working. All right. She has 3 minutes. Rob, can you set a timer, please?
So let me scramble around for my notes. Sorry.
Speaking about emerging contaminants.
Right, okay. So good day, everybody. My name is Tyler Madison, and I am a resident of Chesterfield County, and happy to have a chance to just talk a little tiny bit about emerging contaminants. So a lot of this was covered today in some of the reports that you all listened to. So my one item would be that as the emerging contaminants become more pressing in the public eye, it would be very useful for the DEQ and the board and whoever else, like the governor, to update their information sheet that they give to the farmers on emerging contaminants. That would be something that is, from what my research found, 15 years old. And it seems that a lot has happened in 15 years, and it's not a good idea to have the contaminants that could be harmful to the land of the farmers, could be harmful to the crops, to the farm animals, also to the wild animals that are exposed to the contaminants, and to make sure that everybody looks at the information that at least I see almost every day. Things that are happening in Virginia, things that are happening in other parts of the United States, where farmers are losing their land, farmers are losing their income, their way of living, because of the contaminants that have accumulated. I think that pretty much covers what I wanted to say. But it's pretty interesting, and as I say, it was already covered in today's report. But just for example, the fish advisory that we know is happening in the Chickahominy, and the Virginia Department of Health is covering that, and that's wonderful. But it needs to be broadcast more widely to people that may not know about the fish, and make sure that their health is kept in mind, and everybody's health and is looked at carefully. Thank you very much. All right.
Thank you. We appreciate your comments. Is that it? Okay, thank you. So we have no more public comments, and this will conclude the meeting. So I will ask for a motion to adjourn, please.
So move.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor of adjournment? Thank you.
The Senate of Virginia, Richmond, Virginia.